Hello, my name is Jacqueline Burke. I am a lover and enthusiast of the arts, and I've been this way for as long as I can remember. However, my passion lies truly in the art of theater. Growing up, my family has always been supportive of theater, and as a child, my grandmother would bring me to various plays and musicals throughout the year. Those experiences are where my passion was born, which explains why I chose to major in theater in university and why I'm here today as the team lead for the CEPA project, which stands for Canada's Innovative Funding for Arts Project, examining the idea that if the Canadian government wants theater to play a significant role in promoting the country's culture, it will need to reinvent its funding model. To begin, you may not be aware of the current model, and therefore you very well could be sitting before me asking yourself, if this funding model has to change, what is it doing wrong? So let's start there. The current funding model is split into groups and comes from different levels of government, as well as private foundations and sponsorships. Among others, two major funding organizations that I will focus on today are the Canada Council for the Arts and the Department of Canadian Heritage. The Department of Canadian Heritage, as stated on the Ontario Presents website, is responsible for policies and programs related to areas of creativity, arts, culture, and more. Additionally, their mandate is to foster and promote Canadian identity and values, cultural development, and heritage. Their mandate closely reflects how important Canadian culture and content is, and they work to support their mandate by funding over 20 sub-agencies, including the Canada Council for the Arts. Canada Council is a primary supporter of the arts in Canada and is known as an arm's length funding agency. Arm's length meaning away from political party interests. As stated on the Ontario Presents website, the Canadian federal government provides the funding to the Canada Council but does not decide how it is distributed. Further, on the Canada Council website, they mention that their mission is to foster and promote the study and enjoyment of and the production of works in the arts. In a new announcement made by the Canada Council, they state a goal they aim to complete by 2026, whereby people across Canada will have increased access to the arts sector will have advanced the existing models for creating and sharing the arts, and they will also have created new ones. So, how exactly have these organizations affected the arts, you may ask? Well, in an article by Brian Fleming of the Globe and Mail, the impact organizations like the Canada Council have had on the arts is examined through a study by Hill Strategies Research of Toronto, which was conducted on cultural spending back in 2007. The report said Canadians spent more than $25 billion on culture last year. For the first time, annual spending on live performing arts exceeds $1 billion. However, as encouraging as this may be, regardless of the age of the article, there are still ways in which the funding of arts can be improved to support specifically the development of original Canadian content. Now, you might be wondering, if we're seeing that these organizations have succeeded in helping cultural spending, then there must not be a reinventing issue, right? Wrong. Yes, growth in cultural spending is good. However, the main focus is Canada's need to follow Canadian Heritage's mandate of fostering and promoting Canadian identity. So why is Canadian culture and Canadian content in theatre even important? Well, some would argue that because Canada is a mosaic of so many different cultures and faiths who live together more or less harmoniously in an expansive landscape, that it is an impossible task to stage sufficient content to have any impact on the promotions of a Canadian image. But others would argue that this is precisely why it's important to avoid the country being perpetually stereotyped. Content that showcases Canada's diversity will serve to educate domestic and international audiences. The Canada Council's newly released strategic plan itself states, to engage and retain new audiences, Canadians will need to see themselves reflected in the culture sector's workforce and its creations. This is exactly where my point lies. While the country has funding for the arts, it does not go far enough in promoting original content where Canadians can see themselves reflected. The Canadian stages that are successful in drawing audiences often depend on imported content or headliners. In the artist's open letter to party leaders of 2015, it is expressed how Canada already has successful artists like Michel Tremblay, Sky Gilbert, and Hannah Moscovich, who have been instrumental in social, moral, and democratic education of Canadians. With that in mind, small innovations in the funding of Canadian arts could have enormous benefits. To exemplify a lack of support for Canadian content, there are many examples to point out, and even standouts have their flaws. Ontario's famous Stratford Festival was born in the 1950s from a $125 city council grant, and over the years has attracted some of the world's most celebrated actors. While the festival contributes significantly to cultural tourism, according to a Government of Ontario webpage, the 2010 festival season generated $139.8 million. Its headlining performances for its 2012 season and 60th anniversary featured very little Canadian content. The government needs to revisit its funding priorities to incent a company like the Stratford Festival to bundle Canadian performances with its other mainstream content. Another success is the award-winning Canadian musical by Irene Sankoff and David Hein, Come From Away, which was the brainchild of a Toronto lawyer, theatre producer, and associate dean of visual and performing arts at Sheridan College. Canadians would argue that it is the story of Newfoundland's hospitality, but when you search the title on the internet, you are first led to a description stating it is the story of the 7,000 passengers who were on their way to different parts of America when the tragedy of 9/11 struck. The festival and the musical were both deserved recipients of government funding, but one could agree that each falls short when it comes to supporting and promoting the country's cultural identity. So now we've reached the fun part. What should change and why? Well, first to emphasize that supporting Canadian content does not mean exclusively supporting artists who will create content in favor of the government. In the interview New Pie and More Pie, playwright Dara Tatel mentions a famous British writer who talked about her government only supporting the artists if they could prove their usefulness, and she called it the instrumentalization of artists. Although the Canadian funding system for the arts must support further exploration of Canadian identity and cultural development, they must also not take this opportunity to push a political agenda onto artists in exchange. If strengthening awareness of the country's diversity is the objective in 2021 and beyond, there are a few actions that might bring big results. Support for the creation of diverse Canadian content that has both domestic and international entertainment value is number one. Number two is lower ticket prices and more accessibility to live theater so that audience capacity is increased, which in turn will generate more theater revenues. Number three is to analyze and increase tax benefits for supporters of the arts. According to a study comparing the analysis of arts funding in Canada and the United States, there is some support for the actions mentioned. The study focuses on three parties, the Royalists, the Realists, and the Radicals, with each agreeing that some degree and form of funding innovation is required. Each group expresses the benefits of tax deductions, incentives, and breaks as a means to incentivize ticket purchasers. After reviewing their perspectives, one can conclude that tax breaks within the performing arts sector could result in increased attendance, support, and opportunity. Certain tax breaks are already in existence. However, if the government wants to increase support for Canadian culture, they must to increase tax break opportunities. One example of tax receipts is explained through the crowdfunding at the Perchance Theatre in Newfoundland and Labrador. In an exploratory analysis titled Crowdfunding Canadian Theatre, there is a description of how, in an effort to raise money, Perchance offered show tickets for pledgers of $100 or more and issued tax receipts to contributors. With the same idea in mind, in order to both increase donations and returning donors, implementing a greater tax incentive may be of great benefit. Secondly, the suggestion that the Stratford Festival might adopt a model that seems to work in New York, whereby theater goers purchase theater packages that give them a combination of Broadway and off-Broadway performances, which might make it possible to expose more people to lesser-known playwrights and more Canadian content. The festival could offer an original Canadian piece in this way, and in doing so, give a larger platform for Canadian playwrights and more opportunity to Canadian actors. The Canada Council expressed in their newest plan that business models in the arts have reached their limit and innovative models are needed to create new possibilities. In following the models mentioned, I believe Canadian theatre will be able to accomplish this goal. Theater is one of a number of entertainment options available. So to have the best chance of competing for the audience, for the attention of audiences with a strong original Canadian product, reinventing the funding model currently in place is required. In conclusion, I hope you can clearly see the need for a funding model that is not only supporting cultural spending in Canada, but rather on Canadian content in hopes that Canadians will see themselves reflected. Finally, there is an article by Peter Worthington in the Huffington Post titled Is the Canada Council Just Funding Hobbies?" within which he criticizes funding as a waste, saying those with artistic desires and talents will do it anyway and not just because someone else is paying for it. Which leaves me here. Are these funding organizations just funding hobbies? If so, why bother restructuring? Or, as I have explained, rather, on the other hand, is this funding part of a greater significant role in promoting Canada's artists, workforce, and culture? Thank you.